Well, I'm Claudia, and I am going to be talking about Arthurian propaganda and about how the figure of King Arthur was used for political purposes, in this case, throughout the Middle Ages and in the early Tudor period, okay? This is just the table of contents. And so my main objective was to explore how two key Arthurian sources, such as Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain and Sir Thomas Malory's The Death of Arthur, were deployed to suit different political purposes, showing the high adaptability of the Arthurian legend. To achieve that, I have closely examined each of the sources, paying attention, of course, to the events, the symbolism, the themes, and I also closely examined the historical context of when each source was produced, and also how these works were understood and perceived and how they were used, as we will see. So, with that said, let me just briefly introduce each source. So first up, we have Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, and this is a monumental piece of work. This is one of the first, if not the first, source that tells us the whole story of King Arthur. And not only that, Geoffrey of Monmouth claims to be telling the whole of British history up to the 7th century. Now, this is very important because he is placing Arthur in a characteristically British historical context. Now, please bear in mind that when I say British, I am talking about the Britons, okay? I am not using the term British in the sense of 19th century British Empire. And this is important because Arthur is a British king, okay? And if we go back to Arthur's origins, we will find that the earliest sources of Arthur are in Wales, okay? So Arthur is British for now. And what I want to highlight about this source right here is that in Monmouth, as Christopher Berard has noted, is presented as a Rex Imperator, as a king emperor. Arthur is here above everything, a warrior and a conqueror. And this is going to be very interesting for some of the monarchs that I will talk about. Then we'll have Sir Thomas Malory's The Death of Arthur, which was published by Caxton in 1485, which is a key date in English history. It was when King Richard III was defeated by Henry Tudor and when the Tudors rose to power. Malory presents us with a very comprehensive Arthurian narrative, okay? We have the rise, the splendor, the fall of Arthur, and absolutely everything in between. It is a very complete narrative. What I want to highlight about Malory is that Malory strengthens and restates the belief in Arthur's return. Now, this is the native British belief that after Arthur's final battle, Arthur didn't really die, and he was waiting to come back to save the people of Britain when they needed him most. And this is going to be very interesting, especially as we will see in 1485. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some of our kings. And let's start with the Plantagenets and with Henry II. Now, Henry II acceded the throne in 1154 after the period known as the Anarchy, which was the civil war between Henry's mother, Empress Matilda, and Stephen of Blois. Now, we're going to talk about history, so bear with me. Henry married Eleanor of Aquitaine, okay, the famous Eleanor of Aquitaine. And through this marriage, he obtained a large number of territories in France, which is known nowadays as the Angevin Empire. Owing to this large number of territories, Henry's reign was strongly marked by territorial disputes over French land with the French king Louis VII, who was, well, Eleanor of Aquitaine's ex-husband and a king from the house of Capet. Now, who are these Capetians? Well, the Capetians claimed to descend from the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne. Now, at this point in history, the matter of France was already famous in Europe, and so Charlemagne was already known for his deeds and achievements. So this connection between the House of Capet and Charlemagne inevitably placed the Capetian kings in a superior position to any other kings in Europe, simply because they were part of this great bloodline. So some, like Geoffrey Ashe, has noted that in order to rival Louis VII, Henry needed something that could be similar to the matter of France, so to say. Ashe notes that England had no equivalent legend and no sense of a pedigree, so he needed this fortifying mythos to be like Louis VII, or to surpass the myth of Charlemagne. And where did he find that? Well, in Monmouth's history, which had very recently been published and which depicts Arthur as a warrior and as a conqueror, we could say a little bit like Henry himself. So Monmouth tells us that everyone stood in awe of Arthur, and so Arthur formed a design for the conquest of all Europe, and he conquered Norway, Gaul, Ireland, Iceland, Scotland. Okay, no country was able to withstand him, okay, and his magnificence and valor spread over the whole world, becoming a terror to the kings of other countries. Basically, nobody does it like Arthur. So what did Henry do with this? Well, Henry, we could say that he understood the importance of being portrayed in a manner similar to Arthur. And luckily for him, he was surrounded by a great group of chroniclers and propagandists, okay, such as poet Wace, who very famously wrote the Roman de Brut under Henry's patronage, and which is a translation into Norman French of Monmouth's history. Now, in Wace, Arthur is, of course, also a great warrior and a great conqueror, okay? Wace tells us that skill and courage were his servants at need, and that he stood head and shoulders above all princes of the earth, both for courtesy and prowess. Now, given the context, given the situation, it can be inferred that Wace gives us with this version of Arthur, not only because he is translating Monmouth, but also because this was of interest for Henry II. You see, Henry's empire, the Angevin Empire, was formed through a combination of some inheritance, marriage, and conquest, okay? And Henry was a great warrior. The problem is that although his mother was Empress Matilda, his father was Geoffrey Plantagenet, who was not a king, but a count. So Henry lacked royal ancestry on his father's side. On the other hand, Louis VII enjoyed, as we have seen, a more than rightful ancestry that inevitably gave him a far better claim to the French territories. So, as Berard has noted, emphasizing nobility of character and deeds, okay, as principal qualities of a good king seems to have been how Henry's writers compensated for his lack of nobility. And we could say that this is kind of what Wace did. But there's another thing. Remember that at the beginning I said that Arthur was a British king. And Arthur is a British king. And that was a problem for Henry because Henry was English. Well, one fateful day, okay, Arthur's and Guinevere's remains appeared in Glastonbury Abbey in 1191. Now, Henry II did not live to see the remains, but some say that he orchestrated this. Others say that it was the monks in the abbey. No one really knows. But regardless of who orchestrated this, The fact is that since Arthur's remains appeared in English soil, Arthur was now an English king by title. And that's very, very interesting, because if an English king, so to say, has conquered pretty much all of Europe, all following English kings are going to have, so to say, right to those lands as well. And this is kind of what Edward I tried to do. Edward I wanted to conquer Scotland, and he sent a letter to the Pope citing 2 passages from Monmouth's history to justify his overlordship in Scotland. Now, this was huge. First, because he was placing Arthur in a scope outside English diplomacy, and second, because he was confirming the historical accuracy of Monmouth's history. So this was huge. This is what he quoted, that Arthur extirpated the whole race of the Scots and Picts and treated them with unparalleled severity, and that ultimately the bishops came to implore the king's mercy, and the king granted them pardon. And then this one, where Arthur basically summons his vassals to display his power as king, and also to confirm his vassals' subjection. So what was the goal of this? Basically, Edward I was saying, hey, Arthur is an English king, okay, because, well, as we know, he appeared in England, so he's an English king now, and he has already conquered all of this. So this belongs to me because I am Arthur's successor through title, okay? I am also an English king. So this was very likely, the idea behind all of this. And over time, other monarchs are going to call themselves Arthur's successors, but the narrative is going to change a little bit, okay? And they are not going to lay claim to Arthur based on the fact that they are also English kings, but because they are literally going to be their successors in terms of bloodline, okay? One such example is Edward IV, okay? Edward IV was the Yorkist champion during the War of the Roses, which was the civil war between the Lancasters and the Yorks. And at the beginning of the War of the Roses, Henry VI of Lancaster was king, and very fittingly, the Yorks saw his reign as a wasteland, okay? Henry VI was sick, he couldn't even rule, so it was a disaster. So the Yorks saw a great opportunity to present their champion, Edward IV, as the rescuer of the nation, okay? Edward IV was young, okay? He was full of energy and full of life, and he also had some Welsh blood in him, minimal, but enough, okay? Enough to create genealogies which drew direct connections between him and the Arthurian bloodline. And they were also very fond of prophecies. They particularly the prophecy of the Red Dragon, which appears in Monmouth's history. This prophecy says that the Red Dragon, which represents the British people, is going to be oppressed by the White Dragon, which represents the Saxons, meaning the foreigners, the invaders. But ultimately, the Red Dragon is going to destroy the White Dragon. Now, this was perfect for Yorkist propaganda because, well, the Red Dragon could be easily identified as Edward IV, given that, well, he had that Welsh blood in him, okay? So he was the heir of this British nation. And very conveniently, the Lancasters, and particularly Henry VI, could be considered foreigners very, very easily because Henry VI's mother was Catherine of Valois, a French woman. So that's what they did. And so much so that in this role right here is a genealogy, and well, as you can see, is absolutely beautiful. In this genealogy, Edward IV is given the cognomen of Rubio Draco, and Henry VI is referred to as Albino Draco. So there you go. And our last king is, of course, Henry VII. Now, Edward IV could call himself the Red Dragon because he had that minimal amount of Welsh blood in him. But Henry VII was really the Red Dragon, okay? The Tudors were actually pretty Welsh, okay? Henry's grandfather was Owen Tudor, who was a Welshman, so they were very Welsh, so to say. And so Henry VII, okay, he obtained the throne of England when he defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. And when Henry VII arrived to the Battle of Bosworth, he was waving the standard of the Red Dragon. Now, what I find very, very interesting about this time period is that a little before the Battle of Bosworth took place, William Caxton published Malory's The Death of Arthur. Now, Caxton is very interesting because Caxton greatly edited the manuscript. We know that because there is another version of Malory's Mort called the Winchester manuscript. And in the Winchester manuscript, there is a dream or a prophecy where the dragon, who is Arthur, fights a bear, and the bear is a tyrant that torments people. In Caxton's version, in the version published in 1485, the word bear is turned into a boar 6 times, as the great P.J. Field has noted, 6 times. And who was the boar of England in 1485? Richard III, whose banner was literally a white boar. So, albeit casually and coincidentally, Caxton pretty much predicted, Caxton/Malory predicted the outcome of the Battle of Bosworth, where the Red Dragon, Henry VII, literally destroys the boar, Richard III. And that was fantastic for Caxton because after that he, of course, earned royal patronage. And so we could even say that Malory's book kind of became a prophetic book almost because it was casually predicting things. And what else does Malory say? Malory says that Arthur is Rex Quondam, Rexque Futurus, the once and future king. Malory is restating the belief, is strengthening the belief in Arthur's return. And Arthur really does come back because Henry VII does not doubt for a second when he has his firstborn son, and he names him Arthur and has him baptized in Winchester, which was believed by some to be Camelot. And this was the biggest piece of propaganda that they could have used, okay? Had Arthur, Prince of Wales, lived long enough to become king, the Tudors would have been set for life. But unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. To finish, some conclusions. For example, well, the figure of Arthur has been used to promote conquests, as seen in Edward I and Scotland. He has also been used to aid in the presentation of, oneself as a redeemer and as a savior of the land, as we have seen with Edward IV and Henry VII. But my biggest conclusion is that I noticed that there was a strong correlation between periods of national turmoil and an increased use of Arthurian propaganda, okay? All of this started after the anarchy, okay? The civil war between Empress Matilda and Stephen of Blois, because Henry needed as Geoffrey Ashe had noted, a fortifying mythos. Okay, he needed to unite the country. And then again, we saw it during the War of the Roses, and especially during Tudor accession, because, well, the Tudors, they established themselves on the throne, but their reign was not stable at all. And as I said, had Prince Arthur lived long enough to be crowned king, I don't know what would have happened, but it definitely would have been exciting. So yeah, in general, Arthur is unsurprisingly a figure of stability, okay? Which, as I have put there, inspired loyalty by tapping into a shared cultural and mythological history. But it is important to remember, at this point in history, Arthur was not yet totally a myth, okay? Arthur was a historical character at this point in general. And that was it. These were my sources. And yeah, thank you.